Hey Startup Nation, I am so glad you came back to join us for another edition of the Startup Life. You clearly are ready to get the tools you need to get ahead of the competition. Go ahead and give us a 5-star rating while you're here. Now, if you're looking for an ad-free experience, go ahead and sign up for our Patreon page, where you will get exclusive content and access to our digital products that we're beginning to launch. The link is there in the show notes. And if you want to ask questions directly to some of our guests, follow the Startup Life Podcast Club on Clubhouse, as some of our conversations will start to happen there. But back to the task at hand. Are you ready to level up? Of course you are. Get ready as the Startup Life Podcast begins now.
It's time to be about that life, the startup life. Here's your host, Dominic Lawson.
All right, Startup Nation. So I hope you're ready to receive some value today. My name is Dominic Lawson, and this is the Startup Life, the show for entrepreneurs and career-minded professionals. You know, Startup Nation, we always thinking about here, primarily in the States, about starting up a venture, starting up a company and stuff like that. But what does it look like starting up a venture abroad if you're not familiar with being abroad? Well, our next guest knows all about that and more. He is the founder and chairman of DigiPlex Data Centers, but he's also the author of Le Deal: How a Young American in Business and Love and Over His Head kickstarted a multi-billion-dollar industry in Europe. He is Byrne Murphy. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, no worries. We're so glad to have you on the show. Really appreciate your time today here on the Startup Life. But, before we kind of get in our conversation and stuff like that, we've been asking people, and we know we're still kind of dealing with this pandemic a little bit and stuff like that. And it's kind of changed a lot of things, the way we do our normal day-to-day life. It's even kind of made us rethink what normal is, right? But I guess I'm just curious from your standpoint and from what you've experienced over the past 12, 13 months, what's a lesson or personal lesson or professional lesson that you've learned over the past 12, 13, 14 months, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't mind at all. It's I have come to a revelation that my prior work lifestyle is no longer appropriate.
Gotcha.
I have been working in Europe exclusively for just under 30 years and living over there about half that time. But for the last 17 years or 16 years prior to the pandemic, I commuted from America. So every third week I'd go to Europe for a week or 10 days, come back, then 3 weeks later, keep doing it. And I did that for 16 years, where you pretty much end up jet lagged wherever you are.
Right.
And the pandemic has prompted me to realize that era is over.
Absolutely.
I'm not going back to that. And the Zoom connectivity and all the benefits it brings enables that. And so does the maturity of my management team over there.
Right.
But there are silver linings to this pandemic.
For sure. Thank you for sharing. And I think we're all trying to find those silver linings, especially as, things start to open back up a little bit here in the States and around the world. So I wanted to ask you about your book. Once again, Startup Nation, that book is Le Deal. We have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you listen to the replay on the podcast to purchase the book. So, and if I'm not mistaken, this book came out back in 2008 and is being re-released on paperback, correct?
Yes, it is. It's paperback for the first time, and it has a new foreword and epilogue and prologue. And one of the reasons it is because it keeps being ordered by graduate schools, business schools, and graduate schools of design or urban planning.
Right.
And so we ran out of books, and a publisher said, we got to republish this. And I was pleased.
Well, of course.
So here we are.
Absolutely. And, and that's the thing about, once you start having graduate students and business schools saying, hey, we need to have this book, as kind of part of required reading, that's obviously a good problem to have for sure. But what are some of those lessons that, that they're getting out of? Because clearly there's some stuff there. We kind of mentioned at the top of the show about like starting a venture, abroad and stuff like that. But what are some of those other lessons that are in the book there, Byrne?
Well, I'd say there are three. One is under what circumstances did I pop off to Europe to launch this new concept? And it was because of the S&L crisis at the time, or a deep recession in America.
Right.
And I discovered I had to find something to do somewhere else. And so my advice would be, including right now, right in this moment of this pandemic, when we're hitting bottom and about to curve back up again in terms of economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
In any downturn, there are opportunities. In any grand dislocation scenario, as we currently have, there are opportunities. And while one may think, oh, how do you find an opportunity when everything is so negative? Well, there's so much dry powder on the sidelines of equity seeking investments and seeking entrepreneurs, especially those with any kind of successful track record.
Right.
There is a lot of capital to back you, and I would strongly recommend it. That's what prompted me to go to Europe the first time. And I did get in over my head, and I did figure it out through American optimism. Excuse me. And I have launched 2 more platforms in Europe since then.
Right.
Each of them in a downturn. So
wow.
That's the opportunity.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, were you about to say something else?
Well, and the second thing is
sure.
That I do work in foreign cultures. And so context matters.
Absolutely.
A lot. And if you don't take that context, which is both cultural, economic, the cycle, if you don't take that context into consideration, then surprises are headed your way, almost all of them unpleasant. So it's worth taking the time to figure out, where am I and why is this different than maybe where I grew up? But for the entrepreneurs who say, listen, pal, I'm staying here in America, and that's difficult enough. Context still matters.
Right.
What's changing around you? What about this digitalization that the whole world's going through? What about popping out of the pandemic? Context is key.
For sure. For sure. And, you talked about, those differences in context. I imagine political context is a big one, which is kind of addressed in the book. You have a story in there where there was kind of some political turmoil that you kind of had to deal with. Could you share that a little bit? Well,
it turns out there was a lot of political turmoil.
Fair enough.
and what I hadn't realized, and it took me a while to figure it out, was that the retail fabric of the economic setting in the old world of Europe, where the emphasis is on job preservation, preserving that downtown core and preserving what the French call each person's métier. The emphasis is on job preservation, not job creation. The American mentality that tomorrow can always be better, we can keep building, and let's focus on the future. Well, Europe has millennia of history in the past. So the way that politicians are elected is not so much by saying, I'm going to bring new jobs to this area. It's by saying, okay, we're going to preserve what we have and enhance it. And when I went in as a naive American and started spouting off about the new concept I brought, I landed in Europe, in France, just after Disney had opened, which was a disastrous opening.
Right.
And they were very naively, totally American. There would be no wine served in Disneyland parks, and how do you say that to the French?
Right.
No lunch wine, no dinner wine? I don't think so.
Right.
No mustaches, no facial hair. So there was this insensitivity to, again, the context, and the politicians hopped all over it. So I had politicians at local, regional, and national level, and eventually the Prime Minister of France got very involved. The future Chancellor of Germany got involved. I ended up in the Supreme Court of Italy and France because I had this new concept, and it just tore up the political, or rather the political environment came at me like a tornado, and I wasn't ready for it. But what an entrepreneur should do is take those forces, build a coalition, determine how the exact same forces could be spun to be winds at your back instead of in your face,
right,
and go right back at them and say, actually, because of what you're saying, this solution is in your interest, and here's why, ABC.
For sure.
That's ultimately what I did.
For sure. No, I appreciate that. And, you bring up something that's interesting that I don't think we as Americans really kind of at least put in context or even think about. It's like you talked about that they have like a millennia over there in Europe and stuff like that. I think we sometimes forget that we're kind of compared to like Europe and stuff like that as a country, we're kind of an infant, if you will, right? We're kind of a baby, if you will. Like we've only been around 200 some odd years, you know what I mean? So they've been around for thousands of years. So thank you for bringing that perspective just now, because I was just thinking about that just now. So I appreciate that.
It is key.
For sure. For sure. So in the book, you talk about, finding opportunities through pattern recognition. What do you mean by that? Can you share that with us a little bit?
over the 30 years, I have taken a concept which is new in America, proven in America, but not yet very mature in America. And I scooped it up and I brought it over to Europe right away, where I had to then prove it in Europe. And in each of the three cases, which was outlet centers, this book is about the outlet centers,
right?
Data centers, which I'm currently doing,
right?
And private residence clubs, which I did in Florence, Italy. In each case, you're playing the product life cycle, the famous S curve, which is taught in every basic business course, of infancy, growth, maturity, and eventually decline. You're introducing a new concept at the infancy stage, which is the highest risk stage.
Right.
And so what I've done is I said, well, that was successful in America for the following reasons. And according to the following pattern, it grew like this with this kind of customer base and this kind of capital. Can I take that pattern, which ended in success, and implement it in a different geography, Europe, and adapt as I go? And it's known as pattern recognition, as opposed to starting with a concept that is so wildly new. There is no place you can compare its prior success. It's just hope. And so I'm the bridge between the innovative California factory of new ideas and innovation and the old world, which is not so good at innovating, but very good eventually of adopting the new concepts,
Gotcha.
Usually from America.
Gotcha. I appreciate you sharing that. And you talked about the product life cycle. I have a quick follow-up question to that. Give me just a second as one of the FedEx planes flies overhead just now. I don't know if you can hear that just now, but the product life cycle, you talked about the four, there's the four phases, that decline stage and stuff like that. As entrepreneurs, when we have a product that's out there in the market and start to hit that decline stage, I imagine there's probably not too much you can do to kind of stop it from happening. But are there some strategies or some things that we can do once it hits that decline cycle to kind of, I guess, slow the decline of the cycle in the decline phase, if that makes sense?
Sure. You can adopt both the automotive industry and the beverage industry's classic response to that, which is Coca-Cola is starting in the 1950s, starting to hit what they perceive to be maturity. Mm-hmm. They say, well, how are we going to kickstart this? Well, Coke came out with Diet Coke. That appeals to a different crowd and expands the pie, doesn't just segment the pie. The 1920s Ford Model T, eventually it was standard every year forever. And then GM said, wait a minute, we're going to have a 1966 Mustang. Then we're going to have a 1967 Mustang with some adaptations. And Apple to this day has, the iPhone 10, then the iPhone 11. And that freshness, that new, and the addiction to the latest, greatest, right, keeps it fresh and keeps expanding. They hope the pie, or at the top of the curve before it bends down towards a decline, it just keeps growing. Apple has been brilliant at that, but they keep adding new products to their core product mix. Right. But I would say the first thing to do is you really have to peel back the onion and say, but why am I concerned about decline with the concept or the product I currently have? Is there a better mousetrap that's going to ensure its decline? Gotcha. In which case, then you got a different set of issues, which maybe you should sell to a consolidator and start something else. So you got to go to the core issue of the decline. As what I do is I don't get into that phase. Gotcha. I ride this up the curve, and if I think it's just starting to hit the maturity, then that's when I say, okay, I've done my job, and I will sell to the whole platform to somebody else, whether it's another consolidator player coming from America or a local finance company or something. For sure. I'm the grower. I'm not so good at massaging once it's mature. Gotcha. And I guess there's also that concept of knowing when to let go. I guess that's something that's important to kind of keep in mind as well. But I appreciate you sharing that. I'm gonna do a quick reset. Once again, Startup Nation, we're talking to Byrne Murphy, the author of Le Deal, and also the founder and chairman of DigiPlex. And once again, if you want to get a copy of Le Deal, it's now on paperback. Now we have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you're listening to the replay on the podcast. So, Byrne, I want to ask you this, because,
you talk about in the book as far as like, certain, the story of the business practices and stuff like that. But when you make a big move like that, especially with a wife and daughter, I imagine there's some personal stuff to kind of get over with, some personal humps and adversity there to kind of get over with, because I mean, as entrepreneurs, we're still people, right? We just so happen to be, starting a venture or something like that, but kind of talk about some of that part of it, that personal part you kind of had to overcome, if you don't mind.
Well, if you go through the personal histories of pick 25 very well-known entrepreneurs, and let's just assume they are Americans for the moment.
Gotcha.
Whether they started up FedEx or they started up Apple, they go through any of the industries and then do a little research. And sadly, the divorce rate is higher than the American average.
Right.
Because the type of personality required oftentimes is so hyper-focused on making this work that there can be collateral damage. And oftentimes when people read a deal, they, especially friends of ours, go to my wife and say, or to me and say, how is it possible that your marriage survived and apparently thrived, because we went from one daughter to 4 daughters over time while we were in Europe, and we're happily married after 30 years. How did that happen? And I jump in and quickly say, you have to understand, the question isn't, how is it possible that your marriage didn't crash?
Right.
Actually, it was because of the marriage that the companies were able to survive and thrive. If you don't have that rock solid support and platform from your partner,
right,
it makes all the rest of it so much more difficult. And I do contend that, like many entrepreneurs, I am wont to work too long, too hard, too intensely.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate enough to have a partner who said to me, my wife said, okay, that's enough. You got to have personal time and balance this out or you will burn out. And that, hard to hear when you're in your 20s,
right?
Essential to hear when you're in your 40s, and when you're beyond in your 50s, you got to proselytize. Come on, guys, don't do it that way. I've been there, done that. Not worth the health risk, etc.
For sure. I appreciate you sharing that. We actually talked to Mark Randolph, co-founder and first CEO of Netflix, and he shared this same sentiment, right? Matter of fact, they invoked like a mandatory Tuesday date night, if you will, to where no matter what was going on, that was going to happen. Did you and your wife kind of do something like that or anything similar to that?
Yes.
Gotcha.
And it was my wife who insisted. At one point, she said to me, we're in the front hall and I was rushing out in the morning for yet another intense day. And she said, come on, we got to have fun. I've planned such and such for the weekend. And I turned to her and I said, you have to understand, honey, I didn't come here to Paris for fun. I came to launch this project. I need to make it work.
Right.
And she put her finger right in my face and said, the minute you think you can live without fun and balance, you will fail. We are doing this weekend and we're going to do something every weekend. And that's the way it is. And that's the kind of, it doesn't sound like it's support, but thank God it was there because it was very much support. It was survival.
Anybody who's been married for a long time knows that support. So I definitely understand where you're coming from for sure. And so I want to kind of transition a little bit because, like you said, you've launched many other a few other, ventures in Europe and stuff like that. And even the one that currently DigiPlex, kind of talk about DigiPlex and the work you do there.
DigiPlex is a venture of data centers, which we design, build, own, and operate all within the same company and only in the Nordic region, Scandinavia.
Mm-hmm.
Why up there? Because you have hydroelectric power, unlimited, which is 100% green. It's also the least expensive power in the world. It sometimes is tied with the Pacific Northwest of America, but very, very inexpensive. And because it's green and our customers are the largest Silicon Valley companies, in essence, the top 10 in the world companies, they have made a vow as new economy companies to be carbon neutral at best and to be carbon negative by 2030 or 2040. Therefore, the demand for pure green and preferably hydroelectric as opposed to just wind or just solar. If you go to cold regions, you have unlimited supply. The wind can stop. The sun can go out. but the snows just keep melting every spring, giving you this power. That's why we're there. We've been at it for 20 years. We're the number one in the region. And I fell into it backwards from my first company, which is the company McArthurGlen in Ladille, because in 1999, when this new phenomenon called the internet, which I did not understand,
right,
started lapping up into the shores of Europe, I said, wait a minute, I get it. You're going to sell products online, but you got to have an inventory to sell. Well, I've got these outlet centers all across Europe. I'll just sell out the back door. This is easy. And in fact, that sounded like a great idea, but it was a bad idea because online e-commerce is not retailing. It's all about logistics, hence Amazon.
Makes sense.
And so I said, well, I'm going to go non-exec at the first company. I'm starting up a new one. And I want to find that nexus of where this new world economy, this virtual economy meets the physical world that I know about. And the answer was data centers. And that's it. I went into that.
All right, Startup Nation. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We got to pay some bills. Once again, my name is Dominic Lawson, and you're listening to The Startup Life. Hey, Startup Nation. I think we can all agree that 2020 was more or less a dumpster fire, right? I mean, come on. On top of surviving a worldwide pandemic, good friends and family of mine lost their jobs, had their hours cut, or went out of business altogether. Yet many of these same people are talented creatives, web developers, photographers, graphic designers, SEO specialists, and writers with solid, marketable, in-demand skills. So I've turned them onto Hectic. Hectic is an all-in-one business management software built specifically for freelancers who are just getting started or looking to take their freelance business to the next level. Hectic is everything a freelancer needs to get started, from an easy-to-use contracts and proposal builder to client management and project tracking to expenses and invoicing that features click-to-play technology that makes it quick and easy for freelancers to get paid. And we all want to get paid, Startup Nation. Built specifically for freelancers, Hectic is everything you need to get started. Visit gethecticapp.com/the startup life now to learn more and start for free. Yep. Adding your first client on the platform will always be free. And if you sign up through gethecticapp.com/the startup life, you'll be supporting me and this podcast, because who couldn't use a little support these days, Startup Nation? Visit gethecticapp.com/the startup life to find everything you need to start or grow your freelancing business today, and put those in-demand skills to good use in the way you've always dreamed of. The link is there in the show notes. All right, Startup Nation, welcome back as we continue our conversation with today's guest here on The Startup Life. For sure. You know, we've been seeing, based on what you were talking about as far as, power, hydroelectric and stuff like that. And we've seen that famous Super Bowl commercial with Will Ferrell and the EV vehicles and stuff like that. And it seems like Europe is really, even from a business, side sense, they've really adopted green energy, green technology and stuff like that. Are there some things that, cause you've been doing business in Europe for a while now. Are there some more things like that, whether it be in the green space or even something else that a lot of American entrepreneurs and stuff like that can learn from their European counterparts?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the short answer.
Okay.
And there's a whole array that could be about 3 or 4 more interviews, but
fair enough.
First off, Europeans have a very well-grounded view in life of how to live in today and not always live in the future.
Gotcha.
Americans, as you said earlier, are such a young country. We're still sort of kind of psychologically moving out west, young man, and anything is possible.
That's true. That's very true.
Focused on the future and focused on building new. And even our downtowns, we are rebuilding our downtowns 20 years after we built it the first time. And so lifestyle and a current life outlook as opposed to a future life outlook is something Europeans do very well. We don't do as well. Now, I can argue the flip side of that. We're more innovative. We are,
right.
we're more team oriented to make it happen in many circumstances, not all. But that's one thing, lifestyle. So if you said, well, gee, Byrne, you've taken all these concepts from America to Europe for over 30 years. What can you bring from Europe back to America? That would be one. An offshoot of that lifestyle is appreciating more widely, more loudly, the environment in Europe than here. And that's part of preserving the old world versus rebuilding the new world.
Right.
And therefore, you have Green Party political parties that are extremely active, but have been for decades. And it's really starting to come in vogue here within the political environment of late. And science there is pretty much respected. And it's agreed that science is science. It's hard to argue with numbers after a while. So, and I should probably stop there. But within those umbrellas of future focus versus living for today.
Gotcha.
And that there are a lot that could be done if you're an entrepreneur. A lot.
For sure.
So one final note.
Sure.
In Europe, there are many more regulations. There's more red tape. There's more bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that acts as buffers and can slow down innovation. And in effect, they're barriers to entry. And that can dissuade a lot of entrepreneurs. And I am here to tell you, those barriers to entry are your friend. If you take the time to surmount them, take the time to understand the context to which we referred earlier, and you get through those barriers, good luck for the competitor behind you, because the barriers get higher each time.
Gotcha.
And once you get out there, you have first mover advantage with a lot of barriers protecting your position. And that, in essence, is what I've done with 3 new concepts each time. It's much easier. It's very hard for me, but it's harder for the next guy.
Gotcha. There's something, Startup Nation, I hope you kind of caught. I guess I just want to reemphasize. You talked about there's a lot of regulation in Europe and that they can slow down innovation, but you didn't say it could stop innovation.
No.
So, so I wanted to make that very keen distinction there because, we hear a lot of times the rhetoric as far as like, it slows innovation and it dissuades, which I imagine it does, but you didn't say it stopped innovation. I just wanted to make sure that was very important to point out. So I appreciate that. So I wanted to ask you this as well, because, you have data centers with DigiPlex and stuff like that. And we there's a lot of data out there just in general, right? Whether it be for businesses or social media and stuff like that. There's a lot of data being generated, now these days and stuff like that. I want to ask you, what are some of those, I guess, those ethical tenets or those ethical core values or something like that when it comes to storing data, housing data, sharing data and stuff like that? Because that's kind of a big topic, from time to time when it comes to the internet and business and stuff like that.
It's a huge topic.
Right.
It's profound in the issues involved and can quickly, in the wrong hands, become dangerous.
Right.
So I'm a big proponent of the benefits of the digitalization of the economy and healthcare in particular, and a whole variety of ways that are helping us spread knowledge and open new fields. I'm a big advocate. My career is based on it at the moment.
Right.
Having said that, I do not ever underestimate the issues that come along with it, whether it's Big Brother, who can track you everywhere. And I would say to anyone listening, never post your picture on any of your accounts. It's very clever and fun to do so, and your face pops up when you call somebody. I would never do that. It gets in the wrong hands and can have visual recognition in ways that you didn't intend for it to have. Never have a shortcut about sending passwords or social security numbers over email or even text. It should go through encrypted, like WhatsApp at least. So there are those issues about security and how it can be used against you or take your data and use against others are real. And I don't apologize for it. And I especially encourage the younger people with all this social media, be so careful. Be more careful than you realize. And I guess I'd close in saying, what force was it whether you agreed with it or not. I'm not getting into any political environment, but
Gotcha.
what force was it that took away 80 million Twitter followers of Donald Trump? It wasn't the government or another political party.
Right.
It was a private sector, high-tech company that said, that's enough,
Right.
according to our definition, and they pulled the plug. So it's powerful amalgamation of data and knowledge and the ability to manipulate the data. And the dialogue is only just starting on that. There's much more to be discussed.
For sure. No, that example with, former President Trump's Twitter page and stuff like that, where, again, like you said, the private sector made that decision. So no, that's definitely could definitely be seen as a slippery slope. For sure. Maybe even, maybe a really fast slippery slope, depending on who you are and stuff like that. But that brings up another question I want to ask, kind of a follow-up, if you will, because you talked about posting pictures and stuff like that. And now we're seeing apps. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Reface app, but which really dives into deep fakes and stuff. If you will, has your company, have you guys thought about this? Have you done any work in this? I guess I'm curious about your personal feelings about, again, I guess how, that data and that facial technology can really be, kind of hazardous. Cause when it comes to, my point of view, the deep fakes really scare me. They really do, for multiple reasons.
There's much, in my view, is the same. There's much more scariness in the misuse of that.
Right. Exactly.
For the average, enjoyment you may get out of it, usually, again, as a young person saying, hey, check this out or check that out. I have real deep reservations about that. And the EU is out front. Again, a lot of regulation over there, more than here.
Right.
They're out front in trying to protect the average citizen from abuses of that kind of data. So in my business, I have to protect our interest from that kind of abuse. And so my concept is defined to the physical world. I have 7 different layers of security. It's all physical. It's not virtual. It's not cyber. My customers, who are the big high-tech companies, they're the ones that need to implement their own protections on the cyber side of life. So whatever is on the server, I don't own any servers. They own the servers. I own the whole data center. They have to take that protection. And I'd say that's sort of a delineation that the average person might want to think about, which is, have I really protected my data correctly? Do I know where my data is?
Right.
And should I be sharing it quite so freely? And I reiterate, no, you shouldn't.
Right.
Be very careful.
For sure. It's almost kind of to the point where if you're not willing to just post your social security number online, you might as well not even post your face. It's like the equivalent, like they're the same almost in this day and age, the way data is kind of thrown out there, for sure. But I appreciate you sharing all of that, for sure. I want to ask you this, kind of change gears a little bit, because, again, you've built amazing companies, across Europe and stuff like that. I'm curious about, we talk about this ideal of like building a company culture and things of that nature. Byrne, what's your doctrine to building a great company culture to where everybody feels valued, everybody's productive and things of that nature?
Great question. First off, there is a debate there's a very vibrant, active debate as we speak within the professional management community for the businesses. Is it still the case? Should it still be the case that the purpose of a company is to protect, enhance, and increase shareholder value?
Absolutely.
That has been the Adam Smith yardstick for a couple centuries in America.
Right.
Or should it be the case that not only should you be addressing improving shareholder value, but you have to address stakeholders' values.
Right.
And which is what I do. And we have 4 stakeholders that we pay attention to all the time. Shareholders, definitely. Mm-hmm. Employees, and I never call them employees. So the team, the company team, everybody's on the team together. The communities in which we operate, and then our customer base. And people, the opponents of stakeholder value, a wider definition, say, well, you're just going to dilute the interest of your shareholders by spending so much time worrying about the other stakeholders, which I think is ridiculous, because if you have happy customers, if you have good, happy community relations, if you have good, a team with very high morale, and then you've created an ecosystem where they all enhance each other's, and it lifts all boats. And I've been doing this with 4 different platforms, having, I think we have 13 different nationalities working for my company now in the Nordics with, 20 different languages, lots of cultural differences.
Absolutely.
If you can get them, and I talk about this in Le Deal, and I've practiced it ever since. The key is, can you get all these people, to use a boating metaphor, rowing in the same direction, to the same cadence, going to the same destination, all at the same time? It's very hard to do in a European context because there's so many different countries and sub-regions within a country. It's easier to, you might think, in America, because we have at least one media market and we all see the same Super Bowl ads and we have somewhat, points of perspective the same. But that's the hardest part of any company, is to take a group of diverse people and transform them into a high-performance team. To go from group to team is hard. But when you do it, that team is a Super Bowl champion, and they could be Tom Brady, and they come back and they do it again and again and again. And my team in the Nordics now, we just rank top 10 in Norway for highest performing team on something that's called Great Place to Work, independent metrics, et cetera, et cetera. Does that enhance shareholder value? By a factor of 10. Are the communities happy in which we work and give us another approval for another extension for our data center and more power? Every time. So I'm a big, big believer in it. And by the way, I don't have to do everything. I don't have to decide everything, and I shouldn't, and I don't want to, because the team is so fired up, they become more and more professional and take more ownership.
For sure. For sure. Thank you for sharing that. Do a quick reset. Once again, Startup Nation, we're actually wrapping up with Byrne Murphy, the author of Le Deal, How a Young American in Business, in Love, and Over His Head Kickstarted a multi-billion-dollar industry in Europe. And once again, Startup Nation, that book is available in paperback now. And if you want your copy, we have a link there in the show notes for easy access if you listen to the replay on the podcast. So, Byrne, I want to ask you this, man. Like I said, we've had this great conversation. I'm so grateful for you and your book and your value you've had today, that you provided for us today. I'm just curious, man, like you've had this amazing career, launching businesses, across the planet and stuff like that. When you decide, whenever that is, when you decide to hang it up, like, I'm, for to go, just kind of, play with the grandkids and stuff like that for the rest of my days, and people start to speak about the legacy of Byrne Murphy. What do you hope they say?
Well, that's a good question. I hope they say he contributed on all fronts.
I hear that.
He contributed to my career, my being anyone who worked at any of my companies.
Right.
He contributed to all the people who fell in hard times, whether it's through personal medical issues or family issues. And I have a set of values we evoke at all of our retreats and all of our team meetings. But there's one that everyone knows it so well, we never write it down, and that's family first. You work at my company, you have an issue with your family, the family's always first. And if you say that and you live it and you breathe it, then it doesn't take long before they trust you. And so you contribute to their well-being. They come back and contribute to the company. That's not the quid pro quo I want. Mm-hmm. I just believe it. I'm one of a large family, and you got to have family first. And so that he was a great contributor, and hopefully modestly so. I don't put my name on. I put my name where I need to.
Right.
I put my money where my mouth is. But I don't need plaques. I don't need lots of PR and all that stuff. And hopefully they might even say, hey, what the hell? He writes a good book. It's funny and it's
right.
engaging. And,
absolutely.
With some messages in there. So that's all I'd like to be known as that, a sincere contributor to the wider cause.
I hear that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let me ask you just a quick follow up. When you talked about I don't need to have, my name in lights and on plaques and stuff like that. And we're living, let's be honest, we're living in an era where entrepreneurship is kind of, for lack of a better word, a little bit trendy. From time to time, and people want to, kind of be Insta famous and stuff like that. Is that something from youth? Is that something where maybe over time you spending time in Europe or your perspective changed, or is that just who Byrne Murphy is? Just kind of talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind me asking.
Well, I'm number 4 of 5 kids.
Gotcha.
4 brothers and our adorable sister in the middle. And if you thought that you were too cool for school and you were going to get out of doing the dishes that night or taking out the trash or shoveling the snow, my parents never had to say anything, because the siblings would come in and say, "You're not too cool for this school, pal.
Fair enough.
Here's a shovel, get your ass out there and do it."
Fair enough.
And that's built into the chromosomes. There is, and in addition, here in America, maybe more so than other countries, we're on a lot of teams, or if you elect to be, a lot of athletic teams when you're young.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the football fall season or soccer, and then you have wrestling or basketball. And if you take your teams seriously, then the team's more important.
Right.
And I would say, listen to Coach Bennett of the University of Virginia team and his style and how he took them from that embarrassing first round loss
absolutely
to number 1 champion the next year.
Right.
And it's only about the team. Own your loss, stick to it, and stick with each other. And, great things happen in teams. Great things happen by some individuals, but more great things happen in teams.
For sure.
And I'm a big believer in that.
Absolutely. No, a big admirer of Coach Bennett from University of Virginia here, because you definitely talk about adversity and turning around on a dime from season to season, for sure. But you bring up an excellent point when you talked about your siblings and you talked about your company culture earlier. It seems like the best company culture, which obviously is installed from the top, whether it be you and your companies, or I guess your parents with your siblings and stuff like that. But it seems like great company cultures really have that self-correctness within the team. Like you don't have to have like this person from on top to always do that correcting, or your parents to do that correcting, because the team itself does that self-correcting. So I just wanted to make that analogy, because I thought that was important to point out.
Well, so may I add one footnote to that?
Absolutely.
So for any entrepreneur who wants to start up and create a platform, not just a single person effort, but you want to hire a team to and grow a company, my absolute advice, strongest piece of advice I would say, is the first thing you do is don't set and announce the corporate goals. We will sell 100,000 units of X by year 3. I wouldn't start with that. I would start with set your corporate values, set your culture. And if you do it correctly and you live by it, you will achieve and exceed your goals. But every time you have a tough decision to make, and when the economy turns tough, or the competitors are being tough, or there are unsavory choices in front of you, if you know what the corporate values are, it's easy to make a decision. If everything is only corporate objectives, you can end up in a gray zone and think, oh my God, what should I do now? Start with company values. And on that, I'm not sure I have much more to add.
Gotcha. No, I definitely appreciate that for sure. And before I ask the last question, Byrne, I just want to say thanks again so much again for coming on the show, sharing your story and sharing your book. Once again, that book is La Deal, Startup Nation. That book, that link to purchase the book is there in the show notes for easy access if you listen to the replay on the podcast. And Byrne, I'm actually just going to turn the microphone over to you, because look, with everything going on, there's a lot going on right now. There are some people kind of looking for some encouragement, to kind of pursue their efforts, their entrepreneurial efforts, their personal efforts. If you would just give us some words of encouragement to take us out for the day, if you don't mind.
Well, sure. If you want to start your own venture, or you're struggling with the current one to get it going, there are some macro elements where the winds have now changed, or are in the process of changing, and it's a good time to be an entrepreneur. Number one, we are still in a capital market era where the interest rate is still 99% lower or lower than 99% of the prior 50 years. So to get access to affordable money to start up and ensure your company thrives, it's better than ever. Number two, that's the debt side. Number two, on the equity side, there is more private equity, dry powder on the sidelines, seeking and searching for smart, dedicated entrepreneurs than ever before. So the capital markets, debt and equity, are in an ideal condition to help. Number three, the macroeconomics. We are bottoming out. We have, the pandemic is difficult. It's real. It's not over, but vaccines are coming. The curve is being bent downwards. We just got to hang in there a little longer with our mask and some other precautions. But even today, JP Morgan Chase came out with predictions saying we're going to snap back faster than expected. We might have a GDP higher than China for the first time since 1973.
Wow.
So all that capital that I mentioned, it wants to get out there. It is just desperate to find entrepreneurs. So it's a good time for that. And then lastly, it's been tough. People have not had the jobs they wanted, maybe have lost their jobs. But there are a lot of talented people who, as a consequence, are either unhappy in the existing jobs or on the sidelines seeking. It's a great time to be picking up talent. It's a really good time to be picking up talent. And there you have the most important elements of raw material: capital, talent, and the economic winds at your back. It's a good time to make a move. Just do it carefully, stick to your values, and it's not all, and there may be short-term survival issues, but keep the end in mind. Keep the longer horizon ever present in your mind, and that's how you become a leader. This is where we're going. I'm the pathfinder. Follow me. Here's how we'll get there.
I hear that. Awesome stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Very powerful stuff. And that's going to wrap up this session of the Startup Life. We want to once again thank Byrne Murphy for coming on the show. Thank you so much, good sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
No worries. No worries. And as always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life, the Startup Life. If you want to let us know what you think about the show, have an idea for a show topic, or would like to advertise on a show, send us a message. Our contact information is there in the show notes, or feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Go ahead and follow us while you're at it. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast One, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and be sure to hit us with that 5-star rating. We would really appreciate that. Be sure to check out the show's website and its startup blog, where either I or some of the world's best business minds share content that will give you the edge you need in your journey, whether that's the path of entrepreneurship or climbing the corporate ladder. Subscribe to our Patreon to listen to ad-free episodes, exclusive content, and digital products that we are beginning to offer. And if you want to be part of the conversation, join the Startup Life podcast on Clubhouse to have the ability to talk directly to some of our guests. And as always, Startup Nation, if you have an idea, be about that life, the Startup Life.